presence. We talked last week about oneness, and today we're talking about the presence. So if we talk about the presence and having an experience of the presence, how would you describe that? When you have an experience of the presence in your own life, how would you describe that? Peace, okay. Clarity. Comfort, connection. Joy. Knowingness. Wholeness. Love. Creativity. Prosperity. So what is this presence that you are feeling? How would you describe that? Sacred. Love. Universal flow. A direct connection with Spirit. Yeah, the real me. Okay, Sandra? Delicious. Oh, it's delicious. Yes. Feeling embraced. Okay, somebody back there. Euphoric. Okay. Free. Yeah, complete. Grounded. Yeah, I love that. In the Christian tradition, it's called practicing the presence, and many of us have this mistaken idea that we don't do it, or that we haven't experienced it, or, quite frankly, that it's difficult to experience. And yet, as evidenced in this room, all of us have had glimpses of it, moments of it, experiences of it. So last week we talked about oneness, spirit and matter, right? This seeming duality, which is actually not a duality at all. There's just really only spirit. And this is spirit in a form that we can see. When we allow ourselves to be open to this oneness, we would say we are experiencing the presence, right? Practicing the presence. And it's particularly appropriate on this particular Sunday in our holiday season to be talking about the presence, the presence of this living Spirit on the day in which we celebrate both Bodhi Day, which is the day of Buddha's enlightenment, December 8th, and December 11th, which is the birthday of Muhammad. And both of these people are people who had an extraordinary experience of the presence. They had an opportunity to move into that place where not only were they talking about it, thinking about it, speaking about it, but they were experiencing it and ultimately living from that place. So let's take a look at what does it look like to live in the presence, to be in that experience. Well, if we start with okay, that slide was supposed to move. There we go. So if we start with the story of Buddha, right? Siddhartha Gautama was born a prince in India, and he never left the walls of the palace. He was never allowed to leave the walls of the palace, and all he saw was beauty and joy and prosperity and all of this really great stuff. And then, of course, he became a teenager, right? Well, you know what the teenagers do. They sneak out at night, right? That's what teenagers do. So, needless to say, Siddhartha snuck out over the wall of the palace, and he was stunned to experience suffering, illness, and death. He observed that. And it was so out of keeping with his experience that he realized that he had been protected from the harsh realities of life. And he was no longer willing to be protected from that, so he went on a spiritual quest. What is going on? And how is there a way to explain, overcome, deal with these illness, suffering, and death? So he was a Hindu. He was following the Hindu practices, and he followed those very stringently. And more and more and more stringently, seeking this experience of the presence. And all the way to the point where he became what we would call an ascetic, who in the Christian tradition we would call it the mortification of the flesh, which means everything about the physical universe is physical body, everything is bad and wrong, has to be tamed or tamped down so that spirit can flow through. Actually, he was so good at this that he just about died. He was living on, I don't know, it depends on which story, it's either 1 bean a day or 1 grain of rice a day. He was that much not about the body. And so he was dying, and a woman came and collected him, picked him up, because that's, of course, what they did. They gave alms to the holy people that were wandering around. They gave food, and she realized food wasn't enough. So she brought him home to care for him, to bring him back. And so now he's no longer a teenager. Now he's 20-something, and what do you think happened? They fell in love, of course. They fell in love, and they married, and he became a householder, and he became a very prosperous merchant. And he said, well, that asceticism, all it got me was near death. So now I'm going to go do this other thing, and I'm going to be successful in life. And he did all of that, and he was, he did all what we're supposed to do to make a successful life, and he was extremely successful, but he was no less closer to God. And he didn't feel like, or he was no more closer to God, I guess we should say. And ultimately, it was like, well, this doesn't really cut it either. And so that's when he sat by the river under the Bodhi tree. And he said, I'm going to sit under this tree until I experience the presence of the divine, until I know the answers to these questions, until he woke up. He became what we would call enlightened, awake. And what did he become awake to? But the oneness that we spoke about last week. He woke up to that oneness, that we're all part of that all of life is intimately connected, and that which connects it is alive, is a living presence, is a well, it's kind of an oxymoron. We would say it's a tangible reality, even though it's intangible in every possible way, as we spoke about last week, and yet it's tangible in some way for our being to experience it. And so he practiced these ways of being in the world until they didn't work anymore, two sort of extremes, and then he withdrew. And out of that withdrawal came this enlightenment, this awakening. And from that awakening came a way of being in the world in alignment with this experience of oneness, with the presence. He called it the middle way, the eightfold path, right? The middle way between the two extremes. Neither so spiritual that we forget about this physical world, or so materialistic that we forget about the spiritual world. Wait, we talked about that last week, remember? The radical idealist and the radical materialist. We talked about that last week. But that there's a place in the middle. Now, interestingly enough, there are some interesting parallels to Muhammad's story. He also grew up and began to observe that while there was a religious sensibility that he was invited to practice with his family, his tribe, his people, he certainly saw a lot of war going on. He saw people being carried off, harems, large harems in which women were being neglected and poorly treated, and slaves, and all of those kinds of things. And he also was like, wait, there's something not right here. There's something not right here, and this is not an appropriate way for us to behave, and if we are somehow understanding the divine. He too withdrew, ultimately, withdrew to a cave, and in that cave he listened for the presence. And it appears that the presence spoke to him, and he wrote the channeled work, the Quran. Beautiful writing. And of course, we recognize that in every faith tradition we have fanatical adherents who are twisting the words, right, or using them inappropriately. We see that in every faith tradition. But Muhammad says the definition of Islam is the way, the attainment of peace by surrendering to Allah. The attainment of peace by surrendering to God. And what is that surrendering but a waking up to the fact of the divine presence, to the reality of the one infinite, and asking ourselves, who shall I be? How shall I behave if I know that this divine presence is this oneness, this infinite reality? In the Muslim tradition, there are 99 names for God, and all of them are praise names. They praise something beautiful and powerful and amazing about this presence. And so in the science of mind, of course, that's what we understand, is that when we wake up to the truth of who we are, when we wake up to this divine reality, everything changes. And we walk in the world differently. The Buddha tried to really, I don't know if the right word is codify it. He tried to really help us understand that when we know the presence, when we're living in alignment with that, that is the way of peace, the middle way, neither extreme. And it's interesting to think about how he describes this eightfold path, the middle way. He calls it the Noble Eightfold Path. It is right view, which would be right perspective, right aspiration, which is what do you think is going to make you happy? What's our contribution? Right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. The Eightfold Path. So, I don't think he means right as in wrong and right, like there's a wrong way, but that there's a right way which is actually in alignment with that divine presence. There's a way of being in the world. There's a way of moving in our livelihood. There's a way of acting. There's a way of speaking and viewing life that is informed by knowing our oneness, by knowing the presence. And when we know the presence, those things actively change. There's a different way in which we show up. Now, I remember years and years ago, Michael Gott and I we'd have long conversations, deep and powerful conversations. Is it always from the inside out that we change our lives? Right? That's what we teach in Science of Mind. You see it when you've believed it. When you change on the inside, set your intention, believe your truth, know your truth. When you change on the inside, then the outside changes. That's the way the law works. But we also teach in the Science of Mind, fake it till you make it. Right? Which means you behave on the outside as if it were already true for you, and by behaving that way, something within us is shifted, and our inner self comes into alignment with the way that we behave. So while we might be angry and want to lash out, we choose to behave lovingly instead, and we discover a place of love and compassion within us, right? That's the way that can work. Or we can say, I'm going to be compassionate, and our behavior is loving as opposed to lashing out in anger. So we can understand the Eightfold Path this way too. We can say that when we're in the presence, when we are courting the divine reality, we will behave these ways: right view, right aspiration, right livelihood, etc., etc. But we can also understand it the other way. If we will behave in these ways, do you see? That will be courting the presence. Because the right isn't right and wrong according to whomever, society, your mother, your partner, your, whatever. Well, that's not a very right thing to do. Not that kind of right, but right as in right alignment, which is, of course, the understanding that Science of Mind has when we say surrender to the will of God. We don't mean some God out there who, is testing us? That we have to. Why is it inevitably that when we think we have to surrender to the will of God, we assume it's going to be something bad? Right? And essentially we use it as an excuse. Well, it happened, unless I'm surrendering to the will of God. In the Science of Mind, we understand that the will of God is always for life, for joy, for growth and health and love, and for the whole trajectory of life is toward good, toward the outpicturing of this very divine essence, this oneness being outpictured. And so when we say surrender to the will of the divine, we're not talking about a divine out there who has only horrible things in mind for us. But it is surrendering to that oneness, to not be fooled by the sense of separation. Remember, that's the thing we talked about last week. This illusion of separation that we suffer under. In Islam, of course, there's the mystical tradition, the Sufi tradition, and Science of Mind tends to relate towards all the mystical traditions very closely than perhaps maybe the way all the traditions are practiced in a more mainstream way. And so we find ourselves very, very connected with the Sufi teachings. Of course, as you know, the primary, the most popular way that we hear the Sufi teachings today is through the poet Rumi, 14th century Sufi mystic. And I have this wonderful book that has snippets of Rumi for every day. And this is the introduction that is written by Timothy Freck. He says this. So how can we learn to embody this extraordinary presence? Islam means surrender. Like other Muslim mystics, Rumi teaches that to become conscious of our oneness with God, we must surrender our separate self to God. We must dissolve our separation, our separateness, into his ocean of love. Then we will experience gnosis, mystical enlightenment, and become a Gnostic or a knower. So when we surrender our separate self, do you see? Now, this isn't surrendering our ego. Actually, you sort of need your ego. If you didn't have your ego, you'd never be on time to any appointment. Right? Your ego, actually, that's what it does. It catalogs and categorizes the space-time continuum. It knows where one thing ends and when another starts, which is, now it's time to start an appointment. Now it's time to start this thing I'm supposed to do. Now this is what's going on, right? Our egoic structure is the structure that we use to wander around the space-time continuum, just like our physical body is the physical structure that we use to be in this experience of life. So it's not our ego itself that's bad and wrong. It's the fact that we believe that it's all there is. Just as we're fooled into thinking that this physical reality is all there is. And we fear death because we don't understand the truth of who we are. And so, just as we can be fooled into believing our physical existence is all there is, so we can be fooled into thinking that the way the egoic structure manages the space-time continuum is the way it is. Except that we know better, don't we? That's what we talked about last week. We know that this isn't actually a space-time continuum that is separate from the divine, but this is the divine showing up. And if that's true about physical reality, that's true about my mind, my body, that's true about my mind, that's true about us too. Ernest Holmes says there's nothing to heal. There's only our sense of separation. That's the only thing that we have to heal, is our sense of separation. Because the separation isn't actually real. It is a belief in the separation. And so the first step of that healing of the sense of separation, as both Buddha and Mohammed have shown us, is that it may be a withdrawal. It may be a withdrawal into a way of being where we aren't so focused on the world, because that's what keeps us fooled. But he goes on to say this: for Rumi, however, enlightenment is not a destination we can arrive at. It is an ongoing process of evolution. This profound teaching is captured by a fascinating legend that records the first conversation between Rumi and his friend Shams, the beloved. To test out Rumi's insight, Shams asked him this: who is greater, the Prophet Muhammad or the Sufi sage Bayazid? Rumi answered, well, without a doubt, Muhammad. Shams asked him, why do you say that? Muhammad said we can never truly know God, yet Bayazid proclaimed, I am God. Why is Muhammad the greater? Rumi explained, Muhammad progressed through many states of realization. Each time he reached a new level of understanding, he begged forgiveness for his previous ignorance. Only the prophet had the endurance to contemplate God in all his aspects at once. In abstraction purified of anything else, that was, remember we talked about that last week, spirit, and in manifestation, matter. He refused to remain caught in any one level of understanding. Bayazid, on the other hand, was carried away by his arrival at the first stage and, intoxicated by this achievement, went no further. Yeah. So we think about this in the science of mind. I mean, it's really an amazing awareness, an enlightened awareness to go, wait, I am God. This is the indwelling reality. I am the divine. And if we stay there, that's the level of awakening that we achieve. And we may not fully engage in an experience of the presence of the oneness. Because, of course, the presence, the oneness, is everything. And then our realization deepens and we go, wait, well, I may be God in my own life, but I'm certainly not God of the universe. God is all that I am, but I'm not all of that. There is actually a transcendent reality. There is a spiritual mystery that is as real as the physical experience and as real as this experience of the indwelling presence. And so our courting of the presence, our deepening in the mystical experience of the living spirit, do you see it? There's forever more to grow into, to realize. I really have to say, I simply do not understand when people leave the science of mind, or they're a little frustrated with the science of mind, and they say, well, this is just not mystical enough. I just have to go someplace else and find mysticism. I don't understand it. I think that means that we've come to I am God, and we've left it at that. And we've only attained a certain level of realization. But when we court the presence, when we recognize this oneness, and we live from the oneness, we don't live so that we can have more oneness, right? You can't have more of something you already are. We can't have more oneness. It's just oneness. We can't have more of it. But what we do is we awaken to it at deeper and deeper and deeper levels. He goes on to say this, Timothy, in this introduction. He goes on to say this. Rumi wants us to abandon ourselves to both the joys of mystical union and the suffering of separation as two necessary aspects of one extraordinary journey of spiritual evolution. He wants us to know that essentially we are God, yet to also be authentically human. Rumi is a paradox because life itself is paradoxical. Now, if you go to the Eightfold Path that Buddha wrote, right, nowhere in it does it say right prayer, right holy and pious behavior, right being better than everybody else. Do you see? These things are in the world. Right speech, to speak from the presence with our loved ones, our coworkers, our family members, to aspire to that which fulfills not only us, but allows us to make a contribution from the presence of the divine that we are. Do you see the middle path? The Eightfold Path is called the middle path because it's between the extremes of that extreme idealist and that extreme materialist that we talked about last week. It's between the extremes. The living spirit, the presence of the living spirit is right here, right now. We don't have to be any more spiritual than we are in this moment. What we need to do is wake up to it. Is to wake up to it. And we do that by courting the presence. Courting the presence, one, sometimes we withdraw. We withdraw to our meditation cushion. We withdraw to those spiritual activities and moments, chanting or sitting in silence or walking in the wilderness, or those things that allow us to withdraw enough that we can stop being fooled by this out here, this apparent separation. We also court the presence by deciding how we are going to show up. Every time that I find myself a little twigged by something that someone does. Actually, Kieran and I were having this conversation not too long ago. One of the things that we're really experiencing is how amazing it is that when she or I rub each other the wrong way, all of a sudden, very quickly, there's an awakening. Oh, do you see that's my old behavior coming out. Oh, that's some, thing from the past. Oh, right. But you're not that person. This isn't that happening anymore. So now I realign myself. She realigns herself. Do you see? Now we're living in the world from that place. This is courting the presence in our own lives. It's not wanting to do away with the fact that we have to work. Okay, we don't have to work. We get to work. Thank you, right? But that we are active in life. We have things to do, relationships to be in, family members. We have things to do in service to the community. We have contribution to make. We have all kinds of actions and activities that are ours to do in the world. But you see, we court the presence by deciding how we're going to engage. Am I going to toss off that comment that comes from my past? Or am I going to take just that second to remember, oh, that's right, we're all one. The presence of the divine is here. The presence of the divine is in you. I can choose right livelihood, right speech, right action, right view. Do you see? Right perspective. Oh, wait, this is the divine showing up. So we court the presence by inviting ourselves to remember this spiritual reality from the inside, and we court the presence by behaving as if we knew it on the outside. And between the two, we have those moments that you so beautifully spoke about. Ernest Holmes this is Joel Goldsmith in Practicing the Presence. He writes this: there are no exceptions to God. No exceptions. Not even you. Right? We always think of ourselves as the great exception. God is no respecter of persons. There is no way in which God can be left out of its own universe, but we can leave ourselves out of it. The presence is always present, but most of us are unaware of it, as we are unaware of the blood coursing through our bodies. The presence fills all space. How many people have felt that presence? It's talked about, prayed about, theorized about, and sermonized about. But are we experiencing it? It is the conscious awareness, the actual feeling or realization of the presence, which is necessary. So the last piece that I would add to all of this is that we look for the presence. We look for it. We look for the living Spirit as it shows up. All the many ways that we can look for it. We look for it in those coincidences, those serendipities, which, as I just heard somebody say, is God's way of remaining anonymous. I love that, right? We look for the ways Spirit is showing up, those loving moments, those insightful things somebody says to us, those opportunities where a door opened we weren't expecting. Do you see, we court the presence by knowing that it's there and expecting it to reveal itself to us, because there's nothing and no one that's outside of that, including any moment that we might be having. So we court the presence by withdrawing. We court the presence by behaving from the truth that we know to be true, even if we don't feel like it. If you wait till you feel like you're all spiritual, I don't know about you, but I could be waiting a really long time. Sometimes I'm not feeling very spiritual, right? But I actually know what a spiritual behavior would be, or a spiritual comment or response. Do you see? So I court the presence by choosing to behave that way regardless of whether I feel like it or not. And I court the presence by expecting to see it, by expecting it to reveal itself. Ernest Holmes says in this thing called You, I see through all physical and mental obstructions to the one perfect presence within me. I see through all apparent contradiction to the one perfect being in every person. I see through all confusion to the one divine presence at the center of everything. We court the presence by seeing it, by looking for it and seeing it. So this week, as we're really starting to move into the holiday season, there's lots and lots and lots going on, things revving up in all kinds of ways and places. We got family stuff going on. We've got things going on in the community and the nation. We got all kinds of stuff. A fabulous time to practice, isn't it? This is a fabulous time to practice knowing the oneness and seeking to experience the presence. Because when we experience the presence, we actually bring it everywhere we go, don't we? So I really invite us this week to look for that living Spirit everywhere you go. Let us pray. And so as we turn within, knowing that infinite oneness, that infinite power, that infinite life, and we recognize that it is love and joy and peace and wholeness and all those beautiful words that we said earlier. That one infinite power and presence is my life and your life and the life of all people on the planet, life of all beings everywhere. It is the life of creation itself. It is the love that pours itself into expression, into form, into the flower and the sunset, into a baby's smile, into the hand we hold, and the lives that we live. That love is the living Spirit, and it is present right here, right where we are. So this morning, I affirm that we take a moment to withdraw from the busyness of life. And we simply go within to the stillness. And in that stillness, we find that oneness, that presence right here. And I affirm and declare for each one of us as we walk through our days this week, engaging with people in our lives, that we see the presence there, for they too are a part of the oneness. And I declare that each and every moment, whatever opportunity we have to act in the world, we move from this truth of the presence right where we are. And we bring love into the world. We allow the light to shine. And truly, we are the living Spirit everywhere we go. And as we affirm this and declare it, we accept it. We accept it for ourselves right now. As we move into this week, we call it good. We let it be. And so it is.